So another way that we might have the same behavior, and maybe it's even a little bit easier to maintain, is that instead of iterating and changing the DOM, what we might do is have a method. I'm going to call this render. We could call it whatever we want to, but let's assume that we're going to pass some data to it. This is going to be the data that we have up here. In fact, let's actually just even rename it. We'll call it numbers. And what I'm going to do here is we're going to have this render method. We'll pass a state and container to it. This is going to be our arrow syntax. Let's move this over. And I'm going to call render with both the data and the list. And what I'm going to do here that's a little bit different is that I'm going to create a variable called HTML. And I'm going to generate my DOM by mapping over my state. And in fact, here what I could do is I could say state.map. This is again going to give me an item. And I'm going to use my syntax because I want to put some HTML in here. So I'm going to say li, and I'm going to get the same results that I had before. We'll go over here, and this is going to be item.value. Let's close our span. Let's close our list item. And we'll have a map. We're just going to have this big string, and let's console log it and see what it looks like. So data is not defined here because I renamed it, of course, numbers. So let's go over here, take a look. So right now we've got this HTML. Let's actually just go a step further by going over here and putting in a ternary operator and say, hey, look, item, if you're lucky, we could say class equals, and I could use single quotes here, and I could say if item is lucky, we're going to give this the string of lucky, otherwise nothing. And if we do that, we could see that we've got two of these that are lucky. And what we could do now is we could specify, hey, whatever you passed in here, and again, this is a self-contained function, container.innerHTML equals HTML. And we've got almost roughly what we had before, but we're forgetting about one thing. When we map, we get an array. We just want a string. So let's join this HTML just by an empty string, and we'll get rid of those commas. Well, how can we get the behavior that we had before? Well, one thing we could do here is we could add an event handler right to our list. And we could add a click event handler. And what we'll do here, first let's ask the question. And we're going to go and grab this. We'll say if ev.target.tagname is going to be a list item. Again, these always come in caps. So let's just do console.log toggle. So it's only if we're clicking on it. Again, it would be a little bit tough to click on anything other than what's here. List, add event handler, add event listener, like that. So if we click on these, well, let's actually print out the string toggle. So what we want to do is we want to identify the element that we ended up clicking on. I'm going to do a little trick here. And what I'm going to do is when we map over something, we also get the index. There's other ways we could do this as well. But I'm going to put in a data index. So usually you put in data when it's really anything that's not really presentational, but you want to identify the data. Usually you precede this with a data dash. And this is going to be our IDX. And let's go up here and let's log, see if we can see it. Let's log our ev.target. And let's actually grab this data index, and the way that we'll end up doing it is we'll say idx equals ev.target get attribute data. Let's be consistent here. Let's call it idx. So this is going to be data idx, and let's console log the idx. Let's take a look. So you notice we could get into a little bit of trouble here by realizing that if we click on here, we're okay. And the reason for that is that we've got our spans within the divs. So sometimes if we just clicked on this, the target is actually going to be the span. And let's fix that by just taking this out. And one of the things we could also do here is we could check for the IDX, but let's just be optimistic. And so here, what we could end up doing is, let's just make this a little bit simpler here. Or we could set up the behavior that we're just clicking on a button or something along those lines. But let's just keep this a little bit simpler by not having the nested tag in here. And so here we'll end up getting these IDXs. And one of the things that we could do is we could end up changing our data by saying, hey, look, your data IDX, and even though this is a string, this will end up working, and we'll say is lucky equals data IDX is lucky, and we're going to negate it. And we could get the same results we had before by actually just rendering and saying we want to render this change in the data, and we'll pass in our list here as well. So we'll get the same results that we had before. We've got our data. I keep on doing this. We change this to numbers. My bad. And this is going to be numbers. So we're pretty much calling the same thing that we did when this rendered in the first place. And we end up getting the same behavior. But it becomes a little bit more maintainable because really what we're saying is, hey, look, this state determines this HTML. When something happens, we're going to change this state, and we're going to re-render the HTML. And we also don't have to go and modify DOM elements directly. Again, they are happening behind the scenes, but instead of creating divs and adding things to them, we could really end up doing this within one shot. And that can end up working out pretty well. We realize even though we end up re-rendering, our list stays the same. So we never end up getting rid of our list. We're just adding our event handler to the list. We can end up querying what it ends up getting clicked on. Here we end up getting this attribute. And in the end, what we're really doing is making sure that our data changes and then re-rendering it so it ends up reflecting that change.